Okay, what I want to do is I want to break down Tucker Pate's at bat here and his technique for swing. I watched him at about 4 at bats. At this point, he actually makes contact, pretty good contact with the ball, gets a hit just deep of the infield, shy in the outfield, shallow outfield. It drops down. It was a nice base hit. He blooped out there. Tough pitcher they faced this day. Again, through good technique and great alignment, great setup, good mechanics. Tucker just he exemplified a great at bat. And I was fortunate enough to get him at this point during this swing when he actually made good contact. So for me to introduce this, I break things down into about 6 steps. There are anywhere from 10 to 12 steps out there. And even in 5 steps, people have different variations of how they like to look at the swing, but I like to look at it in 6. First is the stance. With Tucker and his stance, he has a very unique stance, as it's unique to everybody. No one can have a standardized stance. There's an open, there's a neutral, there's a closed, there's a very wide stance. And then you talk about hand positions, a whole other story that could take a whole day to talk about. With him, you can tell he has a pretty generalized position with his hands, his arms, his elbows. What's unique about Tucker, though, with his stance is he'll approach the box, he'll get into the box, and he takes a sort of a preliminary stance step to get into his actual primary stance. And this is what we see right here. He's kind of set, but if you look, you're going to notice right here, he will take a sort of a step, if you will. Now, this is where he's set in his stance. This is his way, though, of timing the pitcher, trying to figure out what's about to happen. This is kind of what his groove is. So you can't really knock that. It reminds me of John Gant on the Braves, who pitched for them last year. He's got that quirky step when he's pitching. I mean, what can you say about it? It works. So something unique to the individual. The next step I'm going to go into is the step. All right, or I'm sorry, the loading point. So in loading, we're going to talk about how power comes from the ground up. You start that coil portion for stored energy that you're going to generate later. And that lead leg, the very front leg, you're going to see it sort of de-weights in preparation to stride toward the ball. All right, that rear leg that you're going to see, it basically absorbs a lot of the weight as he transfers and weight shifts to the rear. That rear buttock and that hip, that rear trailing leg is going to take anywhere from 90 to 100% of his body weight as he offsets the front foot from the ground, taking his step. So let's see what that looks like for him. Here he goes. He sees the pitch coming in, he sees the release, and that is his slight step that he does in preparation. So at this point, he's deloaded the front leg, the foot's off the ground. He has a perfect anywhere from a 4 to 8 inch stride or step, which is what's recommended. And in doing so, he shifts the weight to the rear. It's about timing. This is what works for him. You're going to notice the hand position. They're pretty much back at this point. He's keeping them back. That's a good point to be at. They're up and high. I like to teach coming high to low, like landing an airplane on a runway. Nice and smooth, downward plane to the ball. And you can generate more backspin and kind of work it that way. So as we look at that, we talked about the step. That step is going to lead into what I call the launch position. The step is going to take that front foot and it's going to bring it back down. And once he steps and lands and makes contact, now that front leg has become a sort of pillar right through the front. That pillar is going to help serve as a rotational element for his hips to open up. They're going to open up that way. And we're going to see that here evident once he pushes forward through his swing. And you can see his hips, how they've opened up now at this point. So when you're looking at that step, he makes contact with the ground. The hands are still remaining back. They're still staying back. He keeps them pretty formed through his step. Notice his head is also steady. He keeps his head steady through that entire motion as well, because he's keeping his eyes on the ball. keeping a level head about himself, seeing the ball coming in. His body weight, his body silhouette sort of drops in elevation slightly. You can tell how he's now falling below the boxes I've put on the screen, but that's his weight transfer from the rear to the front as he's driving toward the ball. So the front foot lands, you start to see the bat drop. That lead shoulder is now starting to pull the bat knob around. His hips, though, however, you can tell in order and sequence, have actually opened up before the hands start to drive around the body. And that's what you want to see, is you want to see those hips lead the arms around, almost like a whip action. So it's a great example of what Tuck's showing here as he drives forward. So the hips have sort of opened up, and you see how they drive. His belly button, his front side on that frontal plane is facing the pitcher. The bat is still sort of lagging behind, right, because he's got that whip action. So that's where we're getting into that launch phase. He's generating that centrifugal force. He's uncoiling that power we talked about earlier. His hands start to get on that line with the ball. They're starting to see it. That bottom hand that's nearest the knob really serves as a pulling action to line the knob of the bat up with the line of the ball, so you can make better contact. So in this point of the launch phase, the hips are really leading the hands through the swing, and that's really good to see how he's generating that. In this particular video, the ball was a little high up in the zone, but that just might be where Sweet Tut likes it, right at that point of the zone, up high in the box, and that's where he went and tagged it. So at this point of contact, which is the next step, he makes contact. The top hand we want to see. Okay. The top hand should be palm up, and it sort of delivers a blow, kind of like a boxer does at close range. And you can see that evident right here, as if we look a little closer. It's that portion of the hand right there, which is palm up, and that's perfect. Okay, that's where you get that power V generated at the extension portion of the swing as he follows through. That's great. The other thing is the bottom hand is going to have that palm down, and that's what you can see right in that area, which is this arm here, the top uppermost arm. All right. So as he's making contact, that back side or that trailing hip starts to have a complete release and rotation through the ball. And he's also just got that very characteristic lower body stance as he's made contact. He's generating his weight shift. He's using that front leg as a pillar of weight to help generate his hips and turn them out and rotate and lead the arms around for power production. One other thing I want to make a point about is his eyes and his head right in here. So he's at the point of past contact. He's now at the point of extension. He's extending his arms on through. He's holding on to the bat. And his eyes, if you notice, they're staying right in line with his front leg. And I like that. That looks really good. So he's kind of right through here as he continues on through the swing. Now, as a lot of little leaguers do, he tends to look up and see where the ball went, because we gotta have that gratification, right? So he sees where the ball's at. He's followed through. Beautiful follow through with Tuck at this point. He's extended. He continues to transfer that energy through contact of the ball. The bat speed continues through. That's the acceleration portion. That back elbow nearest the inside hip that you see here. You can see that back elbow nearest the hip right in this area. It starts to extend out from that boxer blow that we talked about as that lower arm pushes with the top hand. And he gets that whole power V generated. And you can see that as evident right here. That's his power V that he's going to show. Also, another thing I like to see that I mentioned was his lower body. And I like to see this evident here as well. I love seeing how he's configured that way. If I could put Ted Williams' picture up there, you could really see how it mimics very similar motion of old Ted. But everything looks great. I really liked how he followed through with this. Then we get into the 6th step, which is called extend again. And he's just continuing through the swing. He's finishing up very nicely. He has that power V position, extension, rotating under a steady head. He keeps his head relatively steady throughout the swing. After contact, extension, his head stays primarily in one single position, follows through, makes track. Now he's, of course, advancing to his base that he's so well deserved. So let's go back through, just say the steps as they are. After he gets into his stance, his secondary stance. All right, so he's in his stance. We talk about stance, which is not really a step, but I like to include that. Everyone has their own unique. So stance, we got the loading, where his foot's off the ground. That's the step. His foot's now making contact. That's 6 to 8 inches, 4 to 8 inches. He's in the launch position now. He's really generating that centrifugal force, using those hips as they open up. Number 4, he's getting to the contact phase. Top hand, bottom hand, back sides rotating, complete release and rotation. And then finally extension through, transferring that energy continual through the bat speed as it accelerates. And then also extending again to finish up really nicely on the tail end of it. So that's Tucker Pate in an open game we had yesterday for Little League here in Harris County. Just something I wanted to touch base with and do a little analysis on. Thanks.